morning, everybody, and this is our last class before Pesach, and we will, welcome back to the north, and we will continue Bezrat Hashem with Parsha, not the Wednesday right after Pesach, not on the 3rd, but on the 10th of April. 10th of April, makes sense, the day after is a recovery day, and oatmeal day, and all those good things that we do on that day. Today, we are going to try to talk a little bit about the Haggadah. Just a reminder that, God willing, there's a class tonight that's more historical / halachic. Next week is going to be next Wednesday night. There's a class as well. It's going to be more good old halacha. The Seder itself, the Seder night, we have many significant days on our calendar. We talk about the high holidays, the Yom Noraim, where we spend a nice portion of the day in shul. It's a shul experience. It's a spiritual experience in the synagogue, while the Seder night is without doubt a wonderful experience, indeed a spiritual experience, but that one is taken at home. We bring spirituality into our home. And we have a mission that night. We have a mission, to transmit the tradition to ourselves, to the child within, and even more so, if we have children there or grandchildren, we try to transmit the values, the message, the traditions to the next generation. We have this text, this wonderful text known as the Haggadah. When it comes to books that have commentaries and commentators, I don't think there is any book that has reached the Haggadah with the amount of Haggadahs there are. And we're talking about most probably over 1,000, and probably even thousands of different Pirushim and commentaries on the Haggadah itself. And often the commentator has every commentator and every Haggadah has a little bit of a different agenda. There's a different agenda. And when you have a class about the Haggadah, without doubt you're going to go ahead and choose an agenda. There are those that enjoy the Kabbalistic, mystical aspects of the Haggadah itself. A mystical approach to the Haggadah. And I'll share with you an example. When we were younger, and I think the first memories I have of life come from the Seder night. First things, and I'm sure I'm not the only child in the world that can tell you that it's such an awesome night. I still remember sitting there on 24 Fleetwell, not far from here, and seeing my older brother, stealing the afikoman and going like that, in other words, shashing me to be sure I don't say anything about it. I was maybe perhaps 3 or 4 years old, and those are the memories I have. Now, the Haggadah itself, the way it worked in our home in the earlier years, is that we would say the Haggadah and drink the 4 cups of wine. We would sing Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim, and there was always an awareness to finish before Chatzos. We never ever had it past midnight. We had some wonderful traditions at home that and it's halachic in some ways. It's in my opinion normal. My mother grew up in a home that the Haggadah continued, the Seder continued until 3 a.m. 3 a.m. And she remembers, she would share with us that as a teenager, as a kid, she would sit there and hold the pages and said, okay, we did this amount, and we have to have this amount. And then as the night progresses, getting closer to the redemption, and for her the redemption was when the Seder ends. Now, I do not know if that's the ideal of a Seder. I have my own opinion. My grandfather was a Yekes. What can you do? So, the Seder would end with us singing Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim. And that was the end. It was good night. I remember at times that we would sit and ask my father, was it permissible, this is when we were older already, teenagers, is it permissible to drink a cup of Coke? That was the Shaila, and you're not supposed to eat after the Haggadah. So we went through, halachically, we had a discussion about drinking Coke after the Haggadah. In any event, the Haggadah ended with the Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. The songs, those songs that you sing, V'chen Ba'i V'chatzi Alayla, Azrov Nisim, Adir B'Mlucha, Echad Miyodea, None of it was part of our Seder, okay? Then, about a few years before my father passed away, he says, you know what? I think we should start saying it. I said, what happened? This is, what happened? So he gave me a Kabbalistic explanation. My father was very much into this stuff that I have not yet reached, again, higher level. And he explained the following. There's a concept among the Kabbalists that our mission is actually to unite the name of the Ribono Shel Olam. There's some kind of breach that exists in the spiritual realm, and the name of God is incomplete. So the name of God, the Yud, Ke Vav Ke, the letter Yud, and afterwards the letter Hey, and afterwards the letter Vav, that is the complete name of God. It is incomplete in the world as we know it. Okay, and therefore when we speak about the Yud and the letter Hey afterwards, that's the incomplete form. And it is the fact that God is concealed in this world that is incomplete. When he reveals himself in the Messianic era, that will complete the name of the Creator. Okay, that's a mystical term. If you understand it, please explain it to me, but that's what I was told. So now, for example, we are told that when Amalek fought, the Ribono Shel Olam took an oath, Kiyad al Kes, that God took an oath on his throne, but it was noted, it was described as the throne of Ka-Yud, and then the letter Hey. Why not Yad al-Kiseh? Why not the hand on the throne of the complete name of God? Well, it was incomplete due to the fact that you have an entity of Amalek that denies the existence of the Creator, views everything as random. If you have such entities, God is not complete. Our mission is to bring the Messianic era. And if our mission is to bring the Messianic era, what we have to do is try to unite it, bring the name together. So far, so good. That's what he explained. Now, he said that the Seder night is not just a night that we revisit the exodus of the past, but rather there are a lot of signs and symbolisms that relate to the future redemption. We talk about that often. It is a mission of bringing the two together. We have references to the future redemption when God will reveal himself to humanity. So now, if that's what the Seder is about, the Seder has the 15 steps, right? Many people, we do too. We start the Haggadah with standing there or sitting there and singing Kadesh, Ochaz, Karpas, Yachatz, and we have the 15 steps. 15 is a number that always refers to steps. In the Beis HaMikdash, there were 15 steps to enter into the chamber of the Kohanim, from the Ezras Noshim through the Ezras Yisrael to the Ezras Kohanim. There were 15 steps. In Tehillim, there are 15 psalms that begin with the words Shir HaMa'alot. Okay, and 15 is, if you look at the moon itself, it progresses, it grows for a period of 15 days. So 15 symbolizes that number of growth, but at the same time, 15 has the numerical value, my father explained, of the Yud and the Hey together. So the Seder itself is that incomplete, is the state of the incomplete presence of God, the God that we know him in the exile, because it is only the 15th. Our mission, what is our mission in the Seder night? To have that letter Vav and Hey, the letter Vav and Hey, to complete it. And he says that the last 5 songs, he explained, the last 5 songs is the letter Hey. And all at both nights before, when you end the 15 steps and you enter into the Hey, the 5 songs, it begins with the letter Vav, Vayehi bechatzi alayla, ubechen, the letter Vav. So the letter Vav is the Vav, the 3rd letter in the Shem Hashem. The Hey are the 5 songs. So based on that, my father said he feels that we should be saying the 5 songs, and he started singing the 5 songs. I still don't. Okay, but that's an idea, taking a Kabbalistic approach to the Haggadah. Some people are inspired by it. Some people think it's interesting. Whatever it is, that is one school. Then you'll have those that focus on the educational aspects of the Haggadah. They make it interesting. They act things out. Chayav Adam we read that a person is obligated lirot atzmo, to see himself as if he left Egypt. The Rambam has a different reading. A person is obligated laharot, to show himself. You have to act it out. And therefore, among some Sephardi communities, they actually would take the dough, put it in, they would take the matzah, they wrap it in some kind of cloth, and they carried it on their back. They have a ceremony, and this is done by some homes, even among Ashkenazim. They act it out. Why? Chayav Adam, by acting, you experience it. So that's another aspect that exists. Then you have those that enjoy the cute verklach, the small, cute little insights. Students love them. They bring them home. They share them. And a perfect example of the cute insight. There is we eat the first thing we eat Seder night after we drink our first cup of wine is the karpas. Many of us use potatoes. That was basically the food that existed in Europe, the only vegetable that we had. So you ate potatoes. And you eat a small amount. Some note that halachically you shouldn't eat more than the volume of an olive, which should be a touch less than an olive. And for most people, they're hungry by then already, right? Because you're busy Erev Pesach, you try not to eat. And you get this little appetizer, right, as the first thing you bite, and you know that it will take some time until you see the rest of the food. It's the best tasting potato the whole year, especially if it's dipped in salt water. Wonderful. It is called, what is it called? Karpas. What is karpas? So karpas actually was a vegetable that existed in Talmudic times, and that's what the rabbis recommended to use as the vegetable that is there as the appetizer. Appetizer meaning it causes you to ask a question. The rabbis say, have that vegetable, and then the children ask, why are we eating a potato now? We just washed. We expect to go ahead and eat bread now. Why are we eating that small potato? And the child asks, he develops an interest, and that's the mission and the goal of the night. Teach children who are interested, and by them asking questions and doing things differently that night, indeed they will ask questions. So that's the karpas, and that's why the rabbis recommend that specific. What is it? Many people believe that it is actually either celery or petrozelia, parsley. So there are different traditions. Some people use onion, some people use radish, different traditions of what to use. Doesn't make really a difference. But my father would note, and this is mentioned by earlier authorities as well. What do you use as karpas there? Josh, what was the Altamir's potato?
Parsley root.
Parsley root.
Ooh, okay. That's also good. Anyone else? Potatoes? I'm sure there are potatoes.
We use celery.
Celery. So there's celery, there's potatoes. There was, I think in Yiddish it was called apia. Celery, if I'm not mistaken. Apia, Aleph, Peyud, Aleph. So one of the, I think Reb Nosson Adler, the Rebbe Chassam Sofer, said that Apia stands for Kel Poel Yeshuas At Ota. So in other words, they found an explanation. Everyone finds their cute insights.
Yeah.
Okay, fine, use it. Yeah, Apia.
Some people say cucumbers.
Cucumbers?
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
Zalman used cucumbers.
So some use bitter? Okay. We don't want to get into a pickle here. But the idea of karpas, my father explains the following. The Seder night is to relive the redemption. To revisit or to experience the redemption, we have to remember the exile. And the exile was described as avodas porach. Porach was back-breaking labor. And it was something, the number used to describe the number of people that went through that enslavement is 600,000. Not a complete number, but it's the number that's used to describe the people of Israel, because women were not in that count, but nevertheless, the number is 600,000. When you talk about units in Hebrew, units have names. Echad, Eser, Mea. What is the highest unit? The highest unit is known as a revava, 10,000. Meaning you say 10,000, you say there was a revava of people. When you talk about 100,000, you say there were 10 revavas. So if you want to go ahead and describe the 600,000, so there were 60 units of a revava. The numerical value, or the letter that symbolizes or that represents 60 is samach. So basically what happened was, during those years of the exile, we had samach, 60 units of 10,000, worked avodas parech. So if you write that, you put samach, pei, reish, kaf. Okay, you take that. Now, the Exodus was a reversal of that fortune. So we turn this saparach around, that word samach parach around, and that reads karpas. So that's why you take karpas, because that symbolizes that things indeed turned around. So that fits into the category of a cute vart that the children would enjoy sharing. But the approach that I think the most important one is really to understand the structure of this Haggadah. What is it all about? And what are we presenting here? So we must begin with the fact that the significance of the 4 cups. The 4 cups of wine are not a requirement to drink 4 cups of wine, but it's a requirement to hold them and drink them at specific moments during the Haggadah. In other words, if a person is busy and they decide that all they're going to do is just one after the other drink the 4 cups of wine and then move on, they have not fulfilled it. It is not considered 4 cups. You have 4 cups when the first one is said over Kiddush, the second one is said over the Haggadah, the third one the Birkas Hamazon, and the fourth with the Challah, indicating that there is a relationship between the cup and that which is being said. And we're familiar with the statement in the Jerusalem Talmud that the 4 cups correspond to the 4 languages that describe the redemption. Vehi hotzeti, vehitzalti, vegalti, velakachti. So when we keep that in mind, we have a little bit of an understanding. And statement number 1, the first statement that describes the Exodus is God telling us that He took us out of Egypt. And the commentators note, the Maharal, that don't think that when you praise God with that Kiddush, with the first cup, don't think that you are praising Him for taking you physically out of Egypt. Rather, you are thankful that He took you mentally out of Egypt, because the first stage of redemption is to realize we don't belong here. We are different. And Jews have the tendency to be loyal to the countries that host them. And we become so loyal that we become ones who identify ourselves as members of that society. And when we talk about Judaism and Jewish values or a Jewish homeland, we struggle with it because we view ourselves more than anything else as members of this society. And the first step for redemption is recognition. You know what? We don't belong here. Hakara Satov, appreciating the wonderful country we live in, yes, there's no doubt about it. But at the same time, there must be a recognition that we really don't belong here. It's interesting that in the past few weeks, we've been following the new Knesset in Israel. That structure that's having difficulty in putting together a coalition. So one of the members of the Knesset is, we mentioned it before, a fellow by the name of Dov Lipman, getting a lot of coverage because he is from a quote-unquote Haredi background. Studied in Air Israel in Baltimore, made Aliyah, got involved in dealing with the Meshugna zealots in his community, and lo and behold, he's a member of the Knesset. So one of the requirements to be a Knesset member is that you give up your foreign citizenship. So he had to give up his U.S. citizenship. And he mentioned that it was one of the most difficult things for him in the world. It was extremely, he's a Zionist, he's very proud of the state of Israel. He loves the Jewish people, he loves Israel. But to get rid of your American passport, that already is a tremendous... Why? That's what we are as Jews. It is difficult for us. We are loyal to our country. We feel a connection to our country. I think about my grandfather. My grandfather lost his German citizenship. He was no longer a citizen from 1933 and on, right? So what happened is that years later they allowed Jews to go ahead and reclaim their citizenship. So this is 65 years later. 65 years later. This is in 1998. My grandfather was 88 years old. And I flew down with my older brother. We flew down, he was in Lakewood at the time. We put him in a car. We went to Philadelphia to the German consulate there. And they welcomed him back. Welcome back. Azeg. And he was a happy man that he was able to reclaim. It wasn't for finances. He wasn't planning to visit Germany. But at least, and we're talking about, a Torah Jew, but come on, to be German again, that's something that he wanted to do before he leaves this world. Why? Go figure. It's so difficult for us to understand. But we Jews were interesting people. We are extremely loyal. So in Egypt, the same existed. When Jews talked about an exodus, when they would share stories about one day leaving this land and going to the land of Israel, my father used to call it stories like Santa Claus, meaning things that you would tell the kids, but as they grow older, you say, yeah, we're really Egyptians. We happen to have roots in the land of Israel, our ancestors, but now we are very loyal second-class Egyptian citizens. That's how they viewed themselves. The first step of redemption is to go out and declare, you know what? We are different. We are chosen. We have a unique mission. And that's what could start the process of a redemption, and that's a declaration we make with the first cup in our hand, and that's the declaration we make over Kiddush. We go ahead and we say, Asher bo charbona mikolam. That's how redemption begins. The second cup is that he will save us. The second cup is the one that describes the actual Exodus, the plagues, and therefore the Haggadah is the cup of the second cup. The Haggadah is the text that relates to the second cup, the cup of the actual redemption. The third cup relates, believe it or not, to the crossing of the Red Sea, because the third language in the beginning of Parshas Ve'era that describes the redemption is V'ga'alti, Ge'ula. Ge'ula. And the true Ge'ula was at the crossing of the sea, right? The crossing of the sea was that complete Ge'ula. And there was a recognition that God is the boss, meaning even after they left Egypt physically, there were many Jews that gave credit for their departure to Pharaoh. Vahi b'shalach Paro et ha'am. It was Paro, the average Jew you would interview, that would say, yes, we are free. Baruch Paro. That was the norm. Why? If Pharaoh controlled their life, and if for decades upon decades their whole life was an understanding and an appreciation and a worshipping of Paro, it was very difficult to purge that by just leaving Egypt. It was easy to get the Jew out of Egypt. You can't get Egypt out of the Jew. When did they actually have that clarity that it is the Ribono Shalom, Mesayad Agdola, by the crossing of the sea? When Sus Verachmo Rama Bayom, when they see the chariot, the power, the symbol of the Egyptian power, where the horses drown in the sea, then they could go out and declare, you know what? Ashira la Hashem, and that's the Geulah. And it relates to our Birkat HaMazon, because at times we beings feel enslaved to the person who gives us the paycheck, right, to the boss. And we go through a personal redemption. How do we go through a personal redemption? When we realize that that the bread comes from the Ribono Shalom. That's our personal redemption. So the third cup, the cup of redemption, is without doubt that cup of the Birkat HaMazon. Everything is from the Ribono Shalom. It is sent to us through wonderful people at times, but it is indeed the Ribono Shalom who sustains us. The fourth cup, V'lakachti, he takes us as a nation. When does he take us as a nation? By the Har Sinai. And we praise him and we sing the Hallel over it. So this gives us another one. This is the first step of viewing the night itself. It begins, the Haggadah is not just what you read. The Haggadah, the experience of the night, the process of redemption begins with Kiddush. And then we move forward. My father would always focus on the fact that when we do Yachatz, what do? You go ahead, after you Kaddish, Urchatz, you eat the karpas, which we discussed, and then we take the middle matzah and we break it. We break it. As a child, I was taught once in school that the three matzahs correspond to Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. My father didn't like it. He said, don't say it. So I'm not saying it. In other words, it's something that he believed that it has no source, and he didn't agree with it. So what was his explanation to the matzah and breaking of the matzah and figuring out the smaller piece? For those of you who use hand, I have no doubt that when you break it, you'll get a large piece and a small piece. It's very easy. When I'm one of those people that use only machine throughout Pesach, so don't tell anyone. You'll delete. So when you use machine, by the way, sometimes when you break it, lo and behold, the one time you want it not to be even. When you have kids, everything you break, you try to make it perfectly in the middle. The one time it happens is with Seder, to try to figure out which one's larger and is going to be for the afikoman, and which one's the smaller one, which becomes the most important piece of matzah of the night. Why is the smaller one the most important piece of matzah of the night. The Haggadah is are words that must be uttered when the matzah is present. Okay, it's a lechem oni. It's called the bread of affliction or the poor man. But the rabbis also say that it's lechem she'onin olav dvarim harba. The rabbis play with the word, and they say that the words of the Haggadah must be said as this matzah is present. So therefore, throughout most of the Haggadah, you have your matzahs uncovered. But it's not any of the matzah. It is supposed to be the bread that symbolizes exile more than any other piece. The complete piece of bread, the complete matzah, the whole ones, they don't symbolize our experience in Egypt. They look like nice, complete breads. The broken piece of the middle matzah symbolizes our exile. It's a bread that has no other ingredients but flour and water, the bread of the poor man. It is bread that was baked very, very fast. We did not have control over our time. Forget about things rising in Egypt. It symbolized the exile. And in addition, who gets a brekel? Who gets a broken piece of bread? The poor man. So when you say those words of the Haggadah, you have to have that piece present. So therefore, what we do is we always are careful to stick out that piece, that when you say the Haggadah, you see that broken piece. So that becomes the piece of matzah that symbolizes our experience in the exile. Fine. So what is the big piece? The big piece, meaning the one that completes the small one, symbolizes the future redemption. Because the future redemption will complete the exile. It will give us an understanding of why we suffered during the exile. And our mission as Jews is to try to find the redemption, to seek it, right? We're supposed to live our life with an understanding that there is a moment in history that will bring clarity and completion to ourselves and to the world. And therefore the idea of trying to steal the afikomen was explained by my father, that the rabbis note there are 2 times designated for the Messiah to come. One is Be'ito. There's the Ribbono Shel Olam has a date on his calendar where by then the Mashiach must come, the Messianic era must enter. And then there is also the option of Achishena, of us bringing it closer, that if the nation of Israel unites and we act and we follow the ethics of the Torah and we really live our life by those values, we will merit to bring it closer. We can as if steal the time. So that's how he explained the idea of stealing the afikomen, that we are trying to get something that doesn't really belong to us yet, but to bring it to ourselves. And that completes the small piece of the matzah. That's how he came up with an explanation of this odd practice of encouraging our kids to steal, to embezzle, to go ahead and negotiate with stolen goods. These are things that he gave an explanation. There's a cute Chassam Sofer that gives his cute insight into the practice. There is a statement in the Gemara that you should not live in a neighborhood that has no dogs. Now, I don't like dogs, right? I prefer having no dogs right next to me. But there's a benefit, because the Gemara notes that when you have dogs, there are less burglaries. That's what the Gemara says, okay? Now, when they left Egypt, the Torah notes, what happened? No dogs were barking. So what happened if it was a night when the dogs were not barking? What was the natural result on that night? A lot of break-ins. A lot of break-ins. Some sort of was more of a cute word, and I'm sure it was after the second or third cup. So there were no break-ins. So if there were no break-ins, there were a lot of items stolen on that night. To commemorate the fact that lo navach kelev lo, that lo charatz kelev es l'shono, the dogs did not bark, therefore we steal things. That was his cute little insight into the stealing of the Haggadah. Very, very interesting. But my father gave something that gives it a little bit of a bigger picture. And therefore our declaration and our understanding that the broken piece symbolizes the experience of the exile, we make a declaration as we hold it, and we declare, halach ma'anya, this is the bread of affliction, that our ancestors ate in Egypt. Now people always say, wait a second, we eat matzah, not because our ancestors ate it in Egypt, but rather because they ran out of Egypt, and they didn't have time to bake it. So why are we making reference here to that which was eaten in Egypt? So the commentators explain that there are 2 things in your matzah. Number one, yes, that is baked very fast, and that commemorates the fact that they had to run out of Egypt. But if you look at the ingredients, a nice piece of bread is going to have some spices, some sugar, some oil, eggs. You look at the matzah, what does it say on the box? Flour and water and nothing else. So that's the bread of poor men. So when we go ahead and we pick up that piece of bread and we say this is the bread that our ancestors ate in Egypt, we're not focusing so much on the fact that they did not let it rise. We are focusing on the ingredients. The ingredients are the ingredients of poor men. So that's the declaration of the halach ma'anya. In the past, when people had small tables, they would actually remove this small table from people. Child would wonder, it seems to be as if the meal is over, right? You're taking the table away. Why are we doing that? We didn't eat yet. And the child asks questions. And that is done today by not moving the complete table, but by covering the matzah. The child thought, if dad was holding a second ago, the matzah, doesn't that mean we're going to eat it soon? But now they're suddenly covering it again, and the child asks questions. In the past, or perhaps the ideal form of the Seder night would be that the child has no clue that Pesach is coming. He comes to a dinner expecting this to be like any other dinner. Things are done in a very odd way, not the normal, not the usual. And if you think about it, we have, Baruch Hashem, different dishes for Pesach, right? We have even different tablecloths. There's absolutely no halachic requirement to have a different tablecloth for Pesach. If you use detergent, unless you don't use detergent, but if you use Tide or any other Procter & Gamble product as in your washing machine, that gets rid of all chametz. But we have different tablecloth. Everything looks different. So the child already senses a few weeks beforehand, or in some cases a few months beforehand, that something big is going to happen soon. But imagine in a world that, they had very few pots, and perhaps the dishes that they had, perhaps that they would kosher. I don't know exactly what setup they had 1,000 years ago. But it is possible to have a child of age 3 or 4 coming to the Seder night, not knowing that anything is going to be different. And suddenly they wash, they come back to the table, and what do you give them? A potato. The father makes some kind of declaration, and the bread, and the bread at that time was very similar to regular bread. It was before we went thin. You have to remember, the Gemara mentions that your matzah should not be more than a tefach. Your matzahs should not be more than 3.5 inches. If I catch anyone here with a matzah that's thicker than 3.5 inches, he's in big trouble. So it was like that. They were very thick. And little by little, they started shrinking more and more and more. You do have the option of still buying, you could get them in New York, what they call a soft matzah. I don't know how they taste, but they're basically like more similar to the traditional matzah. We Ashkenazim have gone cracker over the past few centuries. But imagine in the past, when they would see the bread, the child would not sense anything different until suddenly that small table that is placed in front of the head of the house would be taken away. And then the child asks, what's going on here? Like, why are we doing things so differently? And then he starts asking questions. Well, why did I see that we had additional dishes for dipping? And why do we go ahead and why are you leaning? There are questions upon questions that are asked. And there's no doubt that if you would do that to a 3-year-old, not prepare him at all for the Seder, and then suddenly shock them, the impact would be much greater. That would work. Today, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why, and by the day after Purim, the children already in the nursery are singing the Manishtana, and they come to the Seder, they know everything, and in some cases they know more than their parents, because they have learned it and reviewed it, and they are experts. It's interesting how and why, but that's a reality. The main and the ideal would have been that it's the night of shock and awe. That should have been the ideal. It's not what happens. But in any event, the structure of the Haggadah still has that, and therefore the questions are asked with the Man Nishtana. It is a night of questions and answers. It is a night that you want the information to stick, and if you don't develop an interest, it will not stick. And that's really what the Haggadah is about. We talk about the different types of kids. We talk about the fact that you should know this is not a night to revisit history. In other words, if I would be giving a lecture on history, I would have absolutely no right to give the exact same lecture a year later. Why? Because people remember it, or at least I hope so. They remember things, right? But when we are here not to share the history of the people of Israel, but to show our appreciation, appreciation is repeated. The word thank you is supposed to be said at home every single day. Why? Because thank you has nothing to do with fact. It has to do with an emotion and a feeling. And this is the night of Hakara Satov. It's a night of appreciation. We appreciate what God did for us. And therefore we say that you should know, even if we were wise, even if we were all scholars, we have the obligation to go ahead and discuss the Exodus. And to prove it, we share a story of the greatest of rabbis who were sitting there in the beginning of the 2nd century. And they're sitting there together in Bnei Brak, and these are rabbis that did not agree on everything, but they nevertheless sat together. And they were discussing the Exodus throughout the night, that the students had to go ahead and remind them that it's morning time, knock on the door correct. So what we're being told here is, remember, we're not here to discuss facts. The rabbis knew the facts. What we are here is to show appreciation, and therefore the more we appreciate, the more we are achieving that which the night is really all about. We continue, by the way, and we note that the Ribbono Shel Olam does not just fulfill a promise, but rather HaKadosh Baruch Hu is one who what? He guards his promise. What's the words? Baruch Shomer Haftachaso LeYisrael. He guards a promise. In other words, my father would note that if I promise someone that I will give him $100 if he meets me at the corner of Young and Bloor at 12 p.m., so if I come there at 12 p.m. and he's there, I give it to him. I fulfill my promise. If he's not there, if he didn't make it, I have no obligation, because I promised him that if he is present there at Bloor and Young, I'll give it to him. But let's say I'm there at Bloor and Young, and at a quarter to 12 I hear there's terrible traffic, so I pick up a helicopter and I go pick him up to bring him to Bloor and Young at 12. In such a case, I'm not just keeping a promise, I'm protecting a promise. I'm protecting the individual to be there for me to fulfill the promise. And that's what the Exodus was about. Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Avraham Avinu, your children are going to go through an exile, eventually I'm going to redeem them. If we would have assimilated and vanished, the Ribbono Shel Olam would have absolutely no responsibility to do anything. We vanished, we didn't show up. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Chishe Veis HaKetz, HaKadosh Baruch Hu worked the numbers out. Originally we were supposed to be there for 400 years. The Ribbono Shel Olam realizes that after 400 years, forget about the nation of Israel being in existence. We're going to vanish. So he calls in some Jewish accountants, and as you know, they work the numbers, and 400 turns into 210. The 190 years, he puts it under his wife, he worked it out to make those 190 years vanish. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Chishev Eis HaKetz. What's the numerical value of Ketz? 190. And what he did was, he did it to protect his promise, not to fulfill it, to protect that we should be around. And that's what we have Hakara Satov for. That it's a God that doesn't forget us, it's a God that remembers us, and that's the declaration that we make at that time. One more thing to remember during the Seder is that there are times that we want to praise Hashem. And the way we praise is with a cup of wine. So therefore, we, for example, want to sing V'hisha Amdol Avasena, that the promise that the Ribbono Shel Olam gave, that we're going to be around for eternity, is one that keeps us in existence, and we lift a cup. Anytime you lift a cup, you have the custom of covering the matzah. Correct? That's the idea. The cup is not as significant as the matzah and brachos. When you put down the cup, remember to uncover the matzah again, and now you've learned as well that the matzah that you want uncovered during the time that you read the text is the broken piece of matzah. That's what we do. Now, the end of the long Haggadah, the end of what we are reading, is when we break down the verses in Parshas Bikurim. Meaning, the Israelites were told in the end of Parshas Dvarim that when they enter in the land, they will bring the first fruit. They bring the first fruit, and they show their appreciation, their hakarat hatov to the Ribbono Shel Olam by revisiting and redescribing the events of the Exodus from Egypt. Those verses became, in essence, the structure of the Haggadah. Because what we do for the last section of the Haggadah is to read those verses, right? Kmo shenemar, b'shivim nefesh. In other words, we read verses, we explain them, and we break them down. So it's quite fascinating. We are describing the events of Exodus, of the book of Exodus, of Shmos, by turning to the book of Devarim that describes the events of the Exodus. Why do it that way? Why use specifically the text of the first fruits to go ahead and describe the Exodus? So the key is when we show our appreciation, we are not describing the greatness of God. We have no ability to do it. It's a chutzpah. It's like the 3-year-old walking over to Einstein and say, you know what, Albert, you're brilliant, right? It would be absurd and ridiculous and a chutzpah. We don't have the right to praise him. We have the obligation to show appreciation, meaning we are thankful for what he did as it relates to us. So therefore, the text of the Bikurim, of the first fruit, is text of Hakora Satov, being thankful that we have a land, thankful that we have produce, thankful that we have a temple in Jerusalem where we can bring it. So it's a section that relates to appreciation. Seder night is not the night that we describe the history of the Exodus. No, it is the night where we show appreciation for the Exodus as it related to us. And therefore, specifically, we turn to the Parsha of Bikurim. So that's what you understand, that when we go through those verses, K'moshe Nemar, Moshe Nemar, you'll see it in your Haggadah, you'll remember and you'll see these are quotes from the book of Deuteronomy of Devarim, because they are in essence there for the sake of appreciation. My late grandfather was my father's father. Unfortunately, the last year of his life, he was not doing well. He really did not, I don't know if he spoke at all, but the condition was not good. There was nurses around the clock. It was very, very depressing, as you can imagine, for the family, because here we have, he was a rabbi in Uruguay for 33 years, well respected. Even when he came to Israel, he always had a lot of activity in his home, and he was just sitting there in a chair for over a year. So the Seder night, his last one, it was in 1986, he sat there where he usually sat, did not say a word, and my father told all of us, told me and my brothers, that we should read the Haggadah very loud this year. All of us should read it, make a tumult. Why? Because he wanted his mother, my grandmother, not to be mindful of the fact that her husband, who was always leading the Seder, running it, but rather the tumult would help. And it worked very, very well. We all walked away with a headache, but the reality is that it was a very successful evening. So we get to the Haggadah, and we say, Rabban Gamliel Haya Omer, right? Kol Shelo Omar Shlosh Dvarim Elu, whoever did not say these 3 things has not fulfilled his obligation. And my grandfather pops up, and he says, Pesach Matzah Morer. And he goes back into his, I don't know what's time to go. That's it. Those were the words he uttered. Pesach Matzah Morer, and nothing else. That was his Seder night. And it's quite amazing how words we say subconsciously become so significant when we're conscious of what we're doing. We have an effect on the subconscious that at that state he knew very well those are the things you gotta say. He said it, and then he went back into his earlier condition. That's the memories that we all have every single Seder. All of my brothers, one of those things we say, Pesach Matzah Mar, because that's an experience that we will never forget. Thank you everyone for coming, and everyone should have a wonderful Pesach season. We shall be gesund, and only good things from Klal Yisrael.